Good afternoon. This is Angela Walker. I'm doing my oral presentation on the reading of 7-2, masculine or feminine or both. The title is The Measurement of Psychological Androgyny by Sandra Bem. The psychological areas of coverage include developmental, behavioral, social, cognitive, child, and cultural. The significance of this study is Sandra changed the view on gender issues. Bem sought independence, equality, and self-direction. She presented novel concepts and measurements for the emerging change in the way psychologists and others thought of men and women. Prior to the 1970s, behavioral scientists viewed gender identity as primary masculine or primarily feminine on a one-dimensional scale, with masculinity at one end and femininity at the other end. Sandra challenged this prevailing notion that healthy gender identity is represented by behaving predominantly according to society's expectations for one's biological sex. She took on the view of Anne Constantinople that masculinity and femininity aren't two ends of a single scale. She proposed that a more balanced person who is able to incorporate both masculine and feminine behaviors. Sandra set out to develop a method for measuring gender on a two-dimensional scale. Bem coined the term androgynous to describe individuals who embrace both masculine and feminine characteristics, depending on which behaviors best fit a particular situation. Bem developed a scale for assessing gender called the Bem Sex Role Inventory, or PSY. In order for Sandra to explore her theory of androgyny, and demonstrate differences between androgynous people and those who are highly masculine or highly feminine, she needed to establish the existence of androgynous individuals. Bem's first concern was to develop a scale that didn't assume a one-dimensional view. Her test incorporated two separate scales, one measuring masculinity and one measuring femininity. Second, her scale was based on masculine and feminine traits that were perceived as desirable for men and women. Previous gender scales were based on the behaviors that were most commonly observed in men and women. Lastly, the PSY was designed to differentiate among masculine, feminine, and androgynous individuals by looking at the difference in the feminine score on the feminine section and the score on the masculine section. To accomplish this, you would subtract the feminine score from the masculine score, and the difference would determine the degree of masculinity, femininity, or androgyny. The closer to zero the results are, the more likely that individual would be androgynous. The PSY consisted of a total of 60 traits, 20 desirable masculine traits, 20 desirable feminine traits, and 20 neutral traits. Sandra utilized 50 males and 50 females to rate 200 traits in terms of how desirable they were for men and women. Sandra took the top 20 in each category. Bem's purpose was to assess the extent to which the culture's definition of desirable female and male attributes are reflected in an individual's self-description. Make note that it's a self-description. The PSY is basically a measure of instrumentality and expressiveness. The results would show either masculine, feminine, or androgynous traits. Bem hoped that the development of the PSY will encourage investigators in the areas of sex differences and sex roles to question the traditional assumption that it's the sex-typed individual who typifies mental health, and to begin focusing on the behavioral and societal consequences of the sex role concepts. She hoped that in a society where rigid sex role differentiation has outlived its utility, perhaps the androgynous person will come to define a more human standard of psychological health. Due to this study, Western culture began to accept the idea that some people are more androgynous than others, and that possessing characteristics of both traditional masculine and feminine characteristics is not only acceptable, but may actually provide certain advantages. Men and women became more engaged in vocations, sport activities, and family activities that were traditionally seen as limited to the opposite gender. Women began to work in men-dominated fields such as firefighters and even soldiers, and men became nurses and lower-level school teachers. Women began taking charge, and men started to explore their sensitive sides. Not sure if you're aware, but there are 4 women that are now coaching in the NFL. Some of them are special teams coaches. I know they're not head coaches, but they are coaches in the NFL. And also, women are now playing football. And I'll talk on that in a minute. Sex role expectations still exert influences over our choices of behaviors and attitudes, and discriminations based on gender continues to be a social problem. Males are still expected to be more assertive and women more emotionally expressive. The pros: the test was valid and reliable. A follow-up study was completed 1 month later to 60 of the original individuals, and the scores remained in correlation. It equally asked 50 men and 50 women to rate the 200 traits in terms of how desirable they were for men and women. The PSY was then piloted to 1,000 students, with results broadly corresponding with their own description of gender identity. The cons: it has cultural and historical bias. What was considered in the 70s is not what is considered desirable now. The measurement of gender identity was done in questionnaire form, so it was based on individual rating themselves, so it's considered subjective. BEM did not take into account social and cultural context when the BSRI was developed. David Mayer reviewed 40 years of behavior based on the BSRI for men and women, and stated that women have become a little less feminine and leaning into the stereotypical masculine traits like being ambitious, aggressive, and dominant. We live in a society that now encourages girls to be all they can be. However, we haven't had the equivalent for the boys yet. In another study, the analysis of androgyny reveals that it forms a very fundamental tenet on which cognitive, developmental, personality, and social aspects of human beings are based. According to Diner, life satisfaction is an overall assessment of feelings and attitudes about one's life at a particular point in time, ranging from negative to positive. And it's one of 3 major indicators of well-being. Satisfaction with current life circumstances is often assessed in research studies, with emphasis being put in the research on the desire to change one's life, satisfaction with past, and satisfaction with the future. These underlines the core reasons behind the search for a new identity and happiness by human beings. There is a need to understand the meaning of life satisfaction because it's a measure of the level of population's optimism and happiness. An understanding of 3 aspects of life satisfaction, which is social, economical, and political, is important. Variables that contribute to androgyny theory exist by Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory that is based on the motivation for the understanding of life satisfaction and the search for true identity. 5 basic needs include physiological needs, safety needs, self-esteem needs, and self-actualization. Individuals who have managed to achieve higher degrees on the 5 basic indicators have expressed higher levels of the concept of androgyny. The concept of androgyny hinges on the desire by man to explore more opportunities and experiment things in their life. There exists a positive relationship between androgyny and life satisfaction. I'm going to run a little bit here. So in the 70s, we had some changes going on culturally and society-wise. We had David Bowie, Michael Jackson, Madonna, and most recently, Lady Gaga. They all present themselves in an androgynous manner. Androgyny is stigmatized along with gender nonconforming individuals because they are perceived to be sexual or gender minorities. Unconventional appearances and mannerisms have been shown to be less acceptable and can make people uncomfortable with their social scripts. In recent years, there is a growing awareness that both gender and sex exist on a spectrum. So how does this affect us? Now that I'm older, but when I went to high school, I graduated in 1995. I did play soccer, and I did play for the William Woods soccer team when I was at William Woods in 95, 96, and 97. My senior year of high school, I did try to get on the football team as a kicker. Because I could kick the ball just as far as any of those guys. But they wouldn't let me play because I was a girl. I've also had a lot of COVID brain, sorry. I've had a lot of problems with people looking at me differently because I am very outspoken. I am very aggressive and I am very dominant. And I do not carry a lot of feminine traits. I do have empathy, but I'm not a hugger. If you scrape your knee, it's get back up and do it again. Unless you're bleeding and dying, I'll take you to the hospital. At least as far as my family is concerned. So I tend to categorize more masculine in that aspect because I also, now that I'm older, I'm in charge of a lot of the household things. I'm in charge of the bills. I'm in charge of the schedule, who does what, who goes where. So I still have a lot of leadership at home. And I also have leadership at work. I am in charge of 4 guys at my station. I am the head person at my station. So I still have these masculine traits. And then when I do get around the chiefs, I am seen as aggressive and very outspoken because I do speak my mind. So these are things that do affect us because, they're, at least in my work, they're on the defensive that I'm going to attack right away. Instead of going, I did something wrong, or, I just want to, it's my way, not your way. So I have a little bit of problem there. But this study I thought was very interesting, because it did open gender identity and schemas too, which I thought was great. So now that I was going to say COVID brain normally hits me about 10 minutes, so I think I'm going to end there before I dig myself a bigger hole. So I hope you all have a great week. I look forward to seeing all your presentations this week. I hope you were able to follow along. And everybody, please stay safe. Just to let you know, I know 6 people within the last 24 hours who have tested positive for COVID. Actually 7 people. And out of those 7, only 1 of them had been vaccinated. So I'm not one to actually push for it, but I ended up having to get it for my job. But it's getting out of control. So please be safe. Please be mindful. So I will see you all next week.